Those are the sounds of East Chicago-based pianist Jim Skafish performing Hark the Herald Angels Sing from his new release Tidings of Comfort and Joy, A Jazz Piano Christmas. The album contains his arrangements of 13 holiday standards, and Jim Skafish joined us in our performance studio recently to talk about his new project. It's a huge contrast from his earlier days in the mid-1970s. That's when he burst on the Chicago scene as an outrageous proto-punk musician with gender-bending costumes and an in-your-face approach to music. His band Skafish went on to perform at clubs like New York's legendary CBGB's and alongside such musical giants as the Ramones and the Sex Pistols. That's led some to consider him the godfather of Chicago's punk scene, and he says he has the battle scars to prove it.
To me, it was like going to war. Okay, when I was on stage, I thought, look, this is my life. This is everything that I felt, all the persecution, all of the sense of being an outcast, all of the sense of being brutalized, and I was going to throw it right back at the audience. So performance, in a sense, was like being an athlete. You know, being a boxer, you're going for the knockout punch. And it was oftentimes very, very violent, you know, in terms of the audience reaction. Musically, I was taking all of my classical training, which most people don't know about, my jazz training, my love of rock and roll, and putting it all together.
You mentioned the sense of being an outsider, being an outcast. Where did that sense come from for you?
Well, I mean, to me, it came from the idea that because I was considered to be strange or weird, and kids were brutal, plus I had 12 years of Catholic school abuse to deal with, too. You know, I mean, the stories of being locked in a broom closet, being choked by teachers, being chased home by kids who were trying to kill you, and that would happen on a regular basis. So it was sort of the way people treated me. I wasn't aware of a perspective of outside or inside. I was just the person who was always treated that way.
So what was it like being at the heart of those early days of the punk scene here in the U.S.?
Well, it was amazing because, first off, there was a belief at that time, and I shared that belief, that here we want to change the world. In other words, we're not doing this to sing a cute little ditty or have a cute little song. We're doing this to really bring about something new. And so to me, there was a feeling of all possibilities were endless. And it was nerve-wracking because there were so many things that kept happening at our shows that were sort of like today's version of reality TV. And those things just kept happening and happening. But it was nerve-wracking, it was exciting, there was an adrenaline rush all the time, and I believed in all those possibilities.
You mentioned reality TV. I mean, what was happening at your shows?
Well, as an example, Sid Vicious's last public event was at our show in New York, and like 3 to 5 major things happened in one day of December of 1978. Miles Copeland's brother saw us at the show. We got a record deal. Sid Vicious had his last hurrah, and it was at Club Hurrahs in New York. He flirted with our female drum roadie. When Patti Smith's brother, Todd, asked him to kindly stop, he hit Todd Smith over the face with a beer bottle. Todd had to get stitches. Jimmy Sands, a Chicago historical figure, singer of the Shadows of Night with the hit Gloria, was our road manager. He threw Sid down a flight of stairs, and of course, in Skafish fashion, the band kept playing on. So that's an example of something that could happen in one night.
Well, here we are now, more than 25 years later. Mm-hmm. And how does this punk provocateur, Jim Skafish, get to the point where he's now coming out with a Christmas jazz piano album?
All along, I've always played this music. It just wasn't what I was really known for. So it was organic. Actually, the way the record came about, my wife had an intuitive flash last August to do the record. She received a psychic intuitive flash that this is the record to do. And it made sense. I had been playing these songs for corporate parties, at restaurants, at clubs during the Christmas season, trying to kind of spice up Christmas tunes. Plus, I've taught over 1,000 children in the inner city, and I would make special jazz Christmas arrangements for them as well. So this was organic. It just, when it happened, it was like, you know, I haven't done a record in over 14 years. Wouldn't it be nice to enter with something different as opposed to just the same thing? And plus, let me assure people, if they're thinking, have I stopped doing rock music? Oh, of course not. The type of punk alternative things I've done will see the light of day again.
Well, you've been kind enough to come into our performance studio today and sit behind our Steinway And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind playing a tune for us here on 848.
I'd love to. You know, I can kind of give you an idea how these pieces came together. You know, if you take a song like Joy to the World, okay, it's the most simple musical thing you can imagine. It's the C major scale. Now, how boring is that, right? Okay, but you start adding altered chords, swing, and I started composing new passages, and here's kind of what you get.
That's Jim Skafish here on 848 on Chicago Public Radio with his rendition of Joy to the World. And we're talking here in our performance studio. And Jim, you know, for those who have never heard you play jazz piano, who may have only heard you in your previous incarnation, it must come as a shock. And yet, as you alluded to, you were really considered a musical prodigy as a young kid. What were some of the more famous jazz musicians saying about your work at the time?
Well, in 1976, the first Skafish rock demo was heard by Stan Kenton. And Stan Kenton said upon one listening, whoever made this music is a genius. And actually, I thank him deeply because that helped to get me my first management deal. In other words, the manager who was there, Scott Cameron, through the entire Skafish situation, that he was managing Stan at the time, and Stan said, look, this is really something you need to get behind. So that was there, and Willie Dixon had always referred to me as the best musician he knew. What was great about Willie is when I used to go see him play, when I was first starting, you know, creating the punk scene, he'd sit me on his lap, and he'd say, I'm going to tell you how to write songs. And he'd say, you've got to keep this story simple. Make sure that you have the message clear so that people understand. And I'm riveted. I mean, here's Willie Dixon telling me how to write songs, right? And Willie was a huge supporter of mine. And one other example is Muddy Waters, who made a quote in UPI, December 81, where he said, when Jim Skafish walks into the room, I could swear it was Mick Jagger. and you can't, there's no amount of anything that could make that happen. If people want to say that about you, it's humbling to say the least, because these are the people that I admire deeply.
Well, help me understand how your various musical worlds help you now reinterpret these holiday tunes, these Christmas tunes.
Well, what really happens with it is when I would take a Christmas tune, right, I would sit there and I would feel it intuitively. I'd play the melody. I'd look at the lyrics and I'd say, what can I build upon here that's authentic to the song? And that comes from the decades of training, the decades of understanding tonality and harmony. Like as an example, when you hear O Come, Emmanuel, it's very dark. It's very moody, right? And so I thought, well, I'm going to add something to it that brings out that kind of ancient moodiness. And I did this.
We're talking here on 848 on Chicago Public Radio with Jim Skafish. His latest album is called Skafish, Tidings of Comfort and Joy, a jazz piano trio Christmas. And we're here in our performance studio where Jim is playing some of his interpretations of Christmas and holiday classics. You've talked a little bit about how you've approached a few specific songs, but overall, what was your approach to this album as a whole?
Yeah, the album as a whole, I wanted it to feel really fresh, really spontaneous. There were some certain things I did to keep that. I didn't meet the musicians before the recording. So the minute that we met, we recorded about 20 minutes later. Okay? I recorded the album in the order that it is sequenced on the record.
So you didn't just do song 7 and try to get that right and come back?
I wanted people to feel that they were experiencing a journey unfolding. And I wanted it to be comforting. I wanted it to be something that made people feel whole and connected, and I wanted it to be musically provocative. I think a lot of the problem with certain Christmas records is that either they're just really predictable, or that somehow the tunes are like out there in such a way that doesn't represent the core of the piece. In other words, I would feel the core of the piece and try and add whatever I could to enhance it, and I really wanted it to be a record that would be fun. And again, it's not a personality-driven record, so it isn't like I tried to do punk Christmas. I wanted to show a different side of my artistry, and hopefully that it would be fun for people.
The new album is Skafish, Tidings of Comfort and Joy, a jazz piano trio Christmas. Jim, would you mind leaving us with something?
I'd love to. This is the little arrangement of the last track in the album, kind of a curtain call reprise, something that would be really playful and fun.
A little jingle bells to get you into the holiday spirit on this Wednesday, November 29th. Jim Skafish's new album is Tidings of Comfort and Joy, a jazz piano trio Christmas. Thanks to Nick White for directing and Melanie Palmer and Mary Gaffney for engineering, and thank you for listening. I'm Steve Edwards, and this is 848 on Chicago Public Radio.